So hello everyone and welcome to UCTV Alive for Kids. I'm your host, Tess Crellin. I'm from the Peter Underwood Centre. We produce this webinar on a monthly basis, and Science Week is usually our biggest episode of the year. So thank you so much for joining us. Before I get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. So you'll notice that your camera is disabled as well as your mic. That's just to protect your privacy. If you would like to communicate with us, please use the Q&A function. That can be to send in some questions towards the end of the episode, or you might even just want to say hello. Let us know something that you've done for Science Week, or say hello to Nathan when he comes on the screen. But I'd also really love to acknowledge country. It's a really important thing that we always try to do at the start of every episode. Aboriginal people were the first storytellers here in Tasmania. So as a reflection of our institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, we wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of Tasmania and the original custodians of the land from which we are broadcasting to you today. And we pay respect to all the elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, we've got Nathan here in the background. He's going to join the screen in a second. Nathan is a senior lecturer in chemistry at the University of Tasmania, and he really enjoys communicating science through magazine articles and stage shows. Maybe you might have seen him at Festival of Bright Ideas in the past, but I'd love to welcome Nathan now to the show. Welcome, Nathan.
Good afternoon, Tess.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. You've got a pretty amazing presentation to give us today on crystals and how they relate to food, flight, and pharmacy. But just before we get stuck into it, could you quickly explain to me and also to everyone watching, in a really easy to understand way, what you do, like what chemistry is?
Sure. So chemistry is all about understanding the materials that make up our world. And the great thing about knowing chemistry is it helps you understand things from, say, the atmosphere when we're breathing in, to the polymers that are in my jacket, to the chemicals that are in my food. So for me, chemistry is a way of viewing the world where I can understand what happens with these chemicals and how they interact with one another.
It's pretty cool. Hopefully, as you go through the presentation, it will become even more easier to understand. So if you're like me and you're still like not quite sure about the basics of chemistry or the basics of understanding how things interact, please just hang in there and listen along. Have you done anything exciting for Science Week yet?
Not yet. This is my first Science Week activity, so it's very exciting.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm going to throw over to you now, Nathan. I'm going to turn off my camera and we can't wait to watch your presentation.
Excellent. All right. Let me share my screen.
Thanks, Nathan.
So hopefully that's coming up for everyone. So my name's Dr. Nathan Kilah. I'm a lecturer in the School of Chemistry, or in the School of Natural Sciences at the University of Tasmania. I really love chemicals and I really love crystals, and chemicals can come together to make crystals. Slides to progress. And they do that by forming these lovely crystals. So what is a crystal? A crystal is a solid object that's made up of lots of really, really tiny units that repeat over and over and over again. So here we've got two types of crystals. This one's silica, which is the same as you find in sand. That's what's in my background on my picture. And the smallest unit there is the silica. And on this side, we have a bismuth crystal, which is bismuth atoms. It's a type of metal that form really beautiful crystals. On the face of it, crystals seem really magical. So if you've seen any of the Star Wars films, all the lightsabers have a crystal inside of them. Maybe you've mined some crystals in Minecraft or used them on a Pokemon to make a crystalline Pokemon. But they're actually in our everyday life. They're not just these sort of strange objects. These people are in a very boring situation here. They're looking at each other's phones or looking at their own phone, but they're actually surrounded by crystals. And hopefully after today, you'll be able to appreciate some of the crystals that are around you. So we're going to start with food. And when we think about crystals in food, there are some really obvious foods that contain or are in the form of crystals. And so what are we familiar with? Well, you might be able to think of them in your classroom right now. Two really jump out. The first one is salt. So salt is sodium chloride, and it is a crystal made up of sodium and chlorine in this one-to-one arrangement. So we get this three-dimensional blocks that we can have as teeny tiny crystals in our salt shaker. The other one we're often familiar with in our kitchens is sugar. So sugar is this relatively complicated looking molecule up the top, and they can all pack together into a three-dimensional object and be there as a crystal. So those are two examples. Here's one that's maybe a little bit different for you. I have a mystery for you. How do you make a salt and vinegar chip that's not soggy? Well, the answer is crystals. And the way we do that, by mixing vinegar and another salt called sodium acetate, we can make this compound down the bottom. Now, you might not be familiar with looking at chemical diagrams, but this is what it's showing. The name of this molecule is sodium diacetate, and it's a powder that you can put onto a crystal. And when you eat it, you get the vinegar flavor, but without actually having to add liquid vinegar. And there's lots of foods that depend on crystal. You might even think about it, but ice cream, we have crystals of the ice. Chocolate, the fats are actually arranged into crystallized molecules. And even in a flavor packet of instant noodles, there are crystals there for some of the different flavoring agents. Second option we're going to talk about here is flight. So when you think about a smartphone, we're going to start thinking about these. If I said, where do you think there are crystals? You might say, oh, well, there's clean glass on the front. Maybe that's a crystal. Actually, that's not a crystal. That's a particular type of material called a glass. It's actually inside. Inside of our phones, inside of our devices are these silicon chips. And these work, or part of the way they work, is by taking advantage of crystals. So it might be hard to imagine, but this big lump on the side here is actually one crystal of pure silicon. And it's made by taking hot melted silicon, which is really, really, really pure, and then slowly drawing up this, what's called a boule, to make it one crystal of silica. That can be cut, polished, and etched to form these chips that go into our devices. So not the salt and vinegar chips, the chips for the smartphones. These are also useful for things like solar panels. Often we mix in some other chemicals to help make them happen. The topic of this bit is called flight. So I want you to think for a moment, where are there crystals on an aeroplane? So you might think it's the windows, you might think it's somewhere else, maybe some of the electronics, but in fact, it is inside of the engine. So this is an example of a jet engine, and inside there's all these teeny things called fan blades. And this is one over here. It's hard to imagine, but that is actually one single crystal. And it takes very complicated technology to be able to make such a strong and reliable component for a jet engine that is just one crystal. The final thing I'll talk about today is pharmacy. So when we're talking about pharmacy, we're talking about medications. And so all of these tablets that are here, you might think that they're made of powders, but most of the time they're actually made of crushed up crystals. And part of the reason for that is making crystals is a really good way to increase how pure something is. So the crystals, these are both examples of sugar. The crystals that are sort of brown looking are not as pure as the crystals that are colorless. And so when we're making drugs, we want to make sure they're really, really pure to ensure that they're going to be functioning as a drug and not have anything in them that we don't want. Moving on. So we have here a production line. This is all automated. But it's really important that we also get the shape of our crystals right. So rather than having sort of feathery crystals or needly crystals, we want to actually have quite lumpy cubic crystals if we can. Why? Well, part of that is because in manufacturing, we're often pushing these crystals down pipes. And it's much easier to get small little chips down a pipe than it is to throw a whole bunch of sticks. So if you imagine pushing crystals through a system in a factory to make powdered pellets for tablets, the cubic crystals are much better. I'm just going to leave you now with two amazingly large crystals. This is an enormous crystal. This is one crystal that's been made to use in lasers. And the very last slide, or I'll jump on from there. You may also have grown crystals yourself. So you can get these crystal growing kits, which are a lot of fun. Or you can even make edible ones if you use sugar. There is an artwork that was made using crystals. And here are the largest known natural crystals. These are inside a cave in Mexico, and these formed potentially over hundreds of years to form these absolutely enormous crystals. And that's where I'm going to leave you. That was very quick, lots and lots about crystals. Hopefully it's got you thinking, and I look forward to answering your questions. So thank you very much.
Nathan, well done. It's so interesting to learn about this kind of thing. I have lots of questions, but it's not about me. It's really about the people who are watching. And I love that last image in the cave with the giant crystals. I actually Googled it when you sent your PowerPoint through, just to make sure it was real. I didn't believe it and couldn't believe that that exists. But I'm going to throw it over to everyone that's watching. I'm going to put on a 3-minute break screen now. You can use that time to let your teacher know what she or he should type into the Q&A box. If you're at home, you can even have a go at typing it yourself, or get a parent or a carer to do it. If you like a shout out, just let us know your school name and a first name, and we can include that when we're reading out the questions. But we're going to do that 3-minute break screen now, so that we've got plenty of time left at the end to answer them all live. So we will see you shortly. Hi everyone, we just cut that video a bit short because it was buffering. So I think it had actually gone for 3 minutes, but the countdown was showing something different. And plus, because there's 21 questions that have come through, so many great things from so many different schools, and Nathan's pretty excited to get stuck into them.
Absolutely.
Should we start at the beginning, Nathan?
Sure.
Yeah, great. There's quite a few here from Sandra, who I believe is a teacher at Nixon Street Primary. So I might read out a couple of the questions that Nixon Street Primary sent through. The first one is, I don't know how you're going to answer these questions in such a short amount of time, Nathan. They're really good. How are crystals formed in caves?
So the main way that crystals are formed, and this works in a lot of different examples, is we start with something that's hot and contains a lot of something that's dissolved. And then as it cools down, they start to crystallize out. So in those caves, we've had hot water, which has got minerals dissolved. And then as it cools over time, the crystals will form.
So interesting. And Sandra has followed that with about 20 individual questions within one or two around the color of, like, how crystals have color, and why did you decide to study it, and is there something spiritual or scientific backing crystals up? Feel free to just, or is
Sure.
paracetamol a crystal?
Okay, so paracetamol, definitely a crystal. Let's go through speed round. Paracetamol, definitely a crystal. How do they get their colors? Normally there's atoms that are inside. Sometimes for minerals, those are what's called doped, only a teeny little bit. Are they used for spiritually? People do use those sorts of things, but studies have found they're about as good as a placebo. So they're nice, pretty things, but there's no advanced thing beyond that property. The best use medically is a pharmaceutical. What else we miss there?
I think we go on to some more questions.
Wonderful.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, though, Nixon Street Primary, for sending in so many different questions, and we may be able to answer them separate to this. We'll touch on that before we finish. So Claire from Moona Primary School has also asked a lot of questions. Again, should we do a quick fire round?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
What is the least used edible crystal? What is the easiest crystal to find? And which crystal is worth the most?
Mm-hmm. So the least used edible crystal, it'd probably say something like ammonium chloride, which is used a lot in Scandinavian licorice, which is really salty licorice I don't really like. That's one. The easiest crystal to find is probably quartz on a beach, or ice in your refrigerator. Those are the probably easiest crystals.
Yeah.
Which is worth the most? Probably some of the gemstones. So there's famous large diamonds, sapphires, rubies, those sorts of things are crystals, and they're often very worth a lot of money.
Amazing. And you were saying before that in your presentation that glass is a type of crystal?
Glass isn't a crystal. So the difference there is crystals are very structured, whereas glass is actually what's called amorphous, which basically means it's like a big tangle of different molecules.
So interesting.
Glass is not a crystal.
Okay, I must have misheard that. Everyone else obviously has been listening properly, because there's no questions about that. We've got a question here from St. John's Catholic School, Richmond, and we'll do a shout out to 34 Blue. What is the rarest crystal in the world?
So the rarest crystals are probably some of the ones that are made in research labs. So an example is I have a colleague who extracts chemicals from Tasmanian native plants. They're only made by Tasmanian native plants, and they're only in a crystal form when we isolate them and prepare them in a laboratory. So they're probably the rarest crystals, some of the rarest crystals in the planet, special crystals from Tasmania that are only found here.
Wow. So the rarest crystals in the world are Tasmanian.
Well, let's say that for now.
Yeah. Oh no, that's a great answer. There's a few more questions again from Moona Primary, which we will hopefully have time to get to, but I'm going to quickly, there's another question here from Nixon Street Primary, but from a different class. So I thought that that might be good. So Navtez from Nixon Street Primary has asked, when you consume crystals, what type of effect can they have on our bodies?
Yeah, so this is a really broad question. And we have to make the really clear distinction that not everything that's a crystal is a food, not everything that's a crystal is medicine. So there are plenty of things that are crystals we might find in our house for, say, cleaning that are definitely not food. But if you eat a crystal like salt or sugar, what typically happens is it will dissolve. So in the water and the liquid in your body, it will dissolve. And then your body's really good at balancing whether it will keep minerals that it's dissolved or if it will get rid of them, either through, weeing, pooing, those sorts of things.
Yeah, great. There's lots of questions from Nixon Street Primary. So I'm going to try to come back to those. There's one that's just, again, kind of getting back to the crux of the real core of what we're talking about here, which is how are crystals made? If that kind of went over my head in the presentation as well, can you explain that again, Nathan?
Yeah, so the main way is we'll normally take molecules and we'll make them give them lots of energy. Either we'll melt them or we'll dissolve them. And then somehow we'll trigger them to come together so that they can assemble into the crystal. So there's lots of ways we can do that. We can take something and make it hot and then cool it down like we did with the silicon. Or we can have something that's dissolved hot and then cooled down like the crystals in the cave. The same thing can happen with, say, the pharmaceuticals. They might dissolve it into a particular solvent, something that will dissolve it, and then you add something else that will make them fall out. So either way, we're taking molecules that are apart and we're bringing them together to form the crystals.
Okay, so it's about either as humans, we do that process in a lab or in a warehouse, or nature does it itself.
Yep, or in your kitchen, or there's lots of places where we can apply that sort of process.
Yeah, so interesting. There's a question here that's come through from me, but I think it's because I gave the link to Norwood Primary after I registered myself. That was the quickest way to do it. And I don't have my email open. I've forgotten the teacher's name, but thank you for sending it through and for joining us even at the last minute. So I'll read it out. So hello from Norwood Primary School. We are 3-4 Rainbow. We loved the presentation. We would like to know, when was the first crystal discovered? How long does it take a crystal to grow and form into shape? How many different kinds of crystals are out there?
Yeah, so in terms of the first crystal, these are objects that have been around since prehistory. So since people have been living in caves or walking on beaches, they've been around crystals.
Mm-hmm.
The second part was...
The second part was, how long does it take for a crystal to grow and form?
So it really depends. I have a demonstration that I've done before where I can literally take a liquid and I can pour it and I can build a pillar of crystals instantly. So we can make crystals in an instant if we have the right technique. Or those massive ones in the cave, they actually are thought to have taken years to grow just because they're so big.
Yeah. And then the last question was, how many different kinds of crystals are there?
As many as there are molecules. So countless types of crystals are out there.
And it's interesting what you said about caves, because Nixon Street Primary, oh no, it's actually Moona Primary. I'm probably saying the wrong school. Sorry if I've read out your question and not said the right school, but Moona Primary have asked, are crystals mostly grown in caves?
A lot of the ones that we'll find in nature can be in caves, but you can even get these little geodes where they're only a small little pocket, but there's water inside that has minerals. And as that cools down, you can also get crystals in that small space. So it doesn't have to be in caves. You can get crystal forming at the beach, where salt crystals form when the water evaporates. Let's say you get a little pool from a high tide, as the water evaporates away, we'll get crystals forming in that pool. They won't necessarily be massive. They might be teeny tiny crystals, but they're still crystals.
Yeah. We've managed to get through a lot of the questions. There's still 9 left, but we've only got 2 minutes.
All right.
I might read out a couple of these ones from Moona Primary, since I've been saying the wrong school name, I think. How many crystals can you use in food? And are there crystals in LCD displays?
Okay, so the food one, there's lots. It's probably too many to list, but the big ones you'll likely find MSG, which some people may or may not use in their food, ammonium chloride, cream of tartar. There's lots. So there's plenty and plenty of crystals that can be used. And I've forgotten the second part again, sorry.
No, that's okay. The other question was about the LCD displays.
Right. So LCD stands for liquid crystal display. So the idea there is you have molecules that can be arranged in sort of a liquid state. And because of that, they can come together to give us, say, the number on a calculator, but they can then be changed or moved so they're not arranged anymore. And we can have sort of the on or off. So it's not quite the same in that it's not a solid, but it's called that because of the way the molecules are assembling together. That's a great question. Really good question.
No worries. I'm going to let you read out the last question, Nathan, but there's also a comment here from Julia that Duncan sent her the link and that her class was really excited for the presentation.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you so much for watching, guys. But I'm going to let Nathan pick this last question and answer it.
Let's go with, what do we got? Trapping light. How do they get their colors? Oh, so we can answer 2 of them at once. So how do crystals get their color? So it all comes down to the atoms that are in it. So if we think about sapphires, rubies, emeralds, all of those are actually the same underlying gemstone, but they have slightly different amounts of colored materials inside of them. And so you get different elements, give different colors. So the question was, if they're a rainbow crystal, the answer is you could make one by using that underlying mineral, but slowly adding different materials when you build up your crystal to give different colors. So crystals get colors from the atoms that are inside of them. And you could make a rainbow crystal if you could control what atoms go in at which bit of the crystal.
So interesting. We've got to finish now, Nathan, but I've just got a really quick question. We're all made of molecules as humans, right? And are we crystals?
We're not crystals because we're not very organized in that sense. Our molecules are quite complicated, but people can have issues with crystals. So the condition called gout is a medical condition, and it's very painful, but it's formed because you get crystals building up inside of your body, crystals of a substance called uric acid. So that's an example where we don't particularly want to have crystals around our bodies.
Yeah, thank you for answering that.
No worries.
I was just thinking of as we were listening along. It's 2:30, everyone. It goes so quickly. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on UCTV during Science Week. Couldn't have asked for a better presenter. Would you like to do a shout out for anything to schools about Science Week or about your work?
No, so just to say, enjoy Science Week, get involved. There's lots of fun activities that are around. If teachers have any questions that they haven't been able to answer today, I'm happy to answer them. You can find my email by searching for chemistry, Nathan, University of Tasmania. And I'd love to hear more from the classes. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As always, you can contact us too at the Peter Underwood Centre if you've got more questions, or you want to send through a photo of your class watching UCTV during Science Week especially. But that's it. We've got another episode next month with Professor Ian Anderson from the uni. It'll also be around the middle of next month. We're a bit like this month. We've just switched things up a bit. So I really look forward to seeing everyone again then. Have a great week.
Bye, everyone.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.